Elephant seal. The door clicked open and a lone man shuffled inside. She sat, staring, her hand wrapped tightly around a cold coffee cup, the ceramic smooth against her calloused palms. She watched him, gliding swiftly toward the counter like some specter, and then sit down firmly, his eyes looking nowhere in particular. She gripped her cup tighter. The air inside the cafe seemed to rush around like there was some northern breeze blowing from an open door. She felt cold and wrapped the fur coat tighter around herself, the white mink softening the harsh breath of a winter's night. It was quiet. The couple sitting near her had begun to share a cigarette, the slight crackle of burning tobacco and paper breaking the cold silence of the room. The smell of coffee and cheap perfume wafted around lazily. The streets outside seemed empty. The old man behind the counter, who looked more like a milkman than a waiter, began to whisper to the strange, ghoulish silhouette who had brought in the perishing gust of air behind him. She pretended not to notice his occasional stares in her direction. She focused her eyes on the brown rings of dried coffee on the plastic table. A cancerous lump was developing in her throat. His glances were not friendly. A dark, inky pitter-patter of rain started to fall on the windows, softly carving teardrops onto the pane of plasticky glass smeared with amateurish polish. Marianne pursed her lips, the wrinkles in her Cupid's bow squeezed tightly, the scarlet lipstick dry and acrid. The man at the counter kept stealing glances toward her. Dread bubbled up into her chest. She shuffled in her booth impatiently, the red leather squeaking loudly, breaking the somber silence. The waiter, with his milky eyes, pointed a long, drooping finger at her and smiled a toothless grin. The couple at the counter tensed up and both looked, in tandem, toward Marianne. A choking bile tickled its way up her throat. The varicose vein itched. Her feet ached. She looked outside the window, her eyes following a raindrop racing its way down the window, until it paused and then finally dropped at the sill. The ghostly man in his clean black suit stood up and made his way toward her booth. His shoes clicked, percussion noises against the sticky floor. His eyes glued to her. A weary look of recognition swooped over him. He pulled out a sticky note from his jacket. Marianne Winters? His eyes darted back and forth between the note and her furrowed brows. She smiled lipstick-stained teeth. She thought about running through the door. She thought about how far she could make it down the road. The vein itched again, cried out for attention. The tumor in her neck pulsed. She bowed her head as a gust of wind blew through her, making her shiver. "I've been asked to pick you up, madam." She breathed heavily, coughed, and traced the cup of coffee with her French tips. "I don't think you've got that right. See, I was expecting someone in a white suit. Is this you, ma'am?" he interrupted, a lazy boredom drawn over every feature. He held up her picture from long ago. Her happy smile, a carefree iris in her eye, a bedazzled headdress, a silver cross hidden under a sequin dress, fluttering eyelids, French tips, and a glowing highlight on her cheek. 1924. June, where she met Harry. Where she met the future, a tall, brown-haired, generous, charitable future, who'd been picked up by a man in a white suit 10 minutes ago. She nodded sadly at the photo. She stared at the ghoul, black suit, his hat still on his head, tobacco-stained lips, and a short, stubby shotgun nose. He clenched his jaw loudly and shifted his pose, his hands on his hips. He held out his arm, directing her to the door. "Come on, ma'am, I don't have all day." His face twisted into an unnatural show of sympathy, but behind those gritted teeth was an inevitability, a strong, authoritative confidence, the impatient temperament of a man who hated his job and was at the end of his day. "I really do think you have the wrong woman." She turned away from him. Looking outside again, watching the rain start to kick up in intensity. I'm expecting someone else." She stumbled over her words. Her tongue felt enormous in her dry mouth. "Ma'am, I don't have time for this. Come on, come with me." He took a step and put his fist against the table. 5 more minutes. Give me 5 more minutes. Just in case. 5 more. Someone could have made a mistake. Lady, listen. It says your name right here." He pushed the note into her face. "Right there, in black and white. Mary Ann Winters. That's you, right?" She pulled away from him more, pushing herself against the window. "I'm sorry, but that's your name, yeah?" He paused, rhetorically. "The car is just around the corner." "Please, I don't think you've got it right. See, my husband was just here, and he got picked up by a man in white, I know." She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and he handed her his handkerchief. Black. "I'm sorry, lady, but there's been no mix-up. Harold Winters is going to the right destination, just as you are." She snorted into the handkerchief loudly. Thoughts batted back and forth like shuttlecocks in her skull. The vein in her leg itched. The drooling sadness welled up from her temples and into her eyes. She stared at him, her mouth a firm line, tensing all of her face to hold back a hurricane. He looked at her with pity, drawn in waxy crayon all over his face. "I'm so sorry." And she grabbed his hand, tight. "Really, I'm sorry. Please, you must understand. He must understand how sorry I am. Really, I am so sorry." The man in black pulled his hand away and stared at her. "I'm good. I'm not like them. I'm good, and I'm so sorry. Please, you must understand. I'm so sorry," she wailed, ignoring the piercing, icy stares they all gave her. "Ma'am, please, it's time to go." The speech yawned out of him. She looked down at the table, down at her silvery gold nails, and her eyes flashed around searching and fishing for something, anything at all. "I'll give you all of this." Mary Ann started to stand and pace toward him. "All of it, you hear?" Her voice aimed at the sky. I don't need this. Or this. You can have them. You can give them to the church. You can give them to anyone. Sell them. Do anything with them." Her voice turned to a common drawl, and she began to shed in front of the man, first throwing her mink coat, then her rings, then her diamonds, tearing off the necklace around her neck. This as well. Take it. Take it all. Just please let me wait. You don't understand." "That's enough." The door of the cafe slammed open, filled with a black silhouette. The rain outside seemed to have faded away, leaving a crusty mist that wafted and waned down the road. A distant growl of an engine ticking over. No dogs barked, no cats mewed. Mary Ann's gasped, hollowed out, a gust of wind taking them up into the sky. The black silhouette glided toward her. "Move aside, Tom," he commanded to the man in the black suit. Mary Ann shivered, her clothes thrown haphazardly on the floor, her sequin dress torn at the neckline. Her hair looked like frozen spikes, and her jowls like curtains over her quivering mouth. She daren't look up. The silhouetted man put his long, spindly arm around her back and whispered a few words, silently, while Tom looked on, grabbing his belt awkwardly and swallowing hard, making smiles toward the young couple who held each other, their arms rope, horror, and aghast. He nodded while the silhouette hushed the stifled sobs of the disheveled woman in a heap on the floor. A thin spider's finger wiped the tears off of her face. Tom stared out toward the door. A black limousine pulled up to the entrance at the cafe, and Tom grimaced at the noise of the thundering engine. He stared back toward the black mass and noticed the woman shivering, her breast poking out of her shredded dress, kneeling down in prayer. He did pity her. He looked toward the roof and sighed. The air in the room was stale. How many more jobs like this did he have left? The woman nodded twice at the black. A hissing noise, like the noise of the wind in the movies, whipped through the midnight cafe. Tom shuddered, glancing at his broken watch, the glass face with small fingernail scratches on it. The silhouette slowly rose, and as he did, he scooped the woman off of the floor like a corpse or a baby and held her, nodding at Tom, walking toward the door. They filed out, James and Mary watching them with their eyes but not daring to move their faces. James held Mary's hand tight, their wedding rings dug into each other, the silver scraping scarred lines into the gold. James tried to pull the wooden statue arm of his wife close to him, but Mary remained rigid and unmoving, feeling her every molecule under inspection, every show of dollar worth under analysis. All the jewels beckoned and invited stares, the tattoos, the small blush of vanity, the mirror she'd packed in her purse the night of the accident, coty powder and a lip stain, her Dior perfume. She felt it all painted on her like pornography. "You two have a nice night now." Tom tipped his hat toward the two of them, but as they stared in horror, his gaze fell on Mary. He sighed, heavy. Ice in her eyes. Ice on her neck dangling precariously, dangling lazily. "I hope I won't be seeing you." A throaty warble, a death rattle, the sound of lungs that try to make animal calls, an elephant seal's hooting, cackling honks, deep. Marianne is thrown in the limo. Tom stares at the woman. James looks at the sweet old milkman behind the counter. Tom stares at Mary. The cafe stays still, a song on pause. Mary shifts in her seat. Silver and gold clang against each other. The pearls on the floor stop rolling. The teardrop rain patters. Marianne folds up in the back of a leather seat. The silhouette licks his black lips, howls, howls and howls, and smiles at the purgatory of a lonely midnight. Tom sighs. Tom sighs.